although pensions are extremely important, we need to revisit a way to make the economic financial model of governments work. And so we need to make a few adjustments.
Successive governments have locked in the pension stronger and stronger over the generations. And if they touch that, they just know that they're going to lose a huge voting block of anybody who's in that age bracket.
Pensions are a little bit like a Ponzi scheme. This sounds as crazy to me as my opinion. I don't know which one is less likely to happen, honestly.
Hey everybody, my name's Ross.
And I'm Fede.
We're two humans, and today we're going to be talking about the aging population and some of the ways that we might be able to fix it. We started this discussion based on a previous topic we were thinking about, where we were talking about European debt and the aging population, and how when a country has lots of debt, they need to have lots of growth and inflation, and the amount of money that they make in the future will be greater than what they make today. But when you have an aging population, you have this problem, because you have people living longer, but also drawing more medical costs as they live longer. As healthcare and treatments improve, they actually use up way more money of the healthcare system, especially as healthcare gets more and more expensive, as we've also said before. And you also have this problem of fewer and fewer workers who are in the country contributing to the actual economy, and all of these old people are drawing pension the entire time that they're living as well. So an aging population is very bad for this model of infinite growth that a lot of countries seem to have adopted.
Yeah, I agree with you. And this is a problem that is particularly relevant for European countries, because other countries, perhaps in Asia or the US, seem to have both a lot of growth and they don't take charge of their citizens' pension to the extent that the European countries do. I just would like to highlight the historical reason on why we developed pensions. And pensions were introduced in the US actually after World War II, because the government realized that it was not possible for men past the 60 years old to keep working in coal mines and have any other physical type of job. And so they introduced this pension as a way to guarantee some sort of income for these people that could not do any physical jobs. I think that right now we have become so reliant on having a pension that it has now become one of the biggest holes in the pocket of European governments. As you said, the amount of money coming in, which is a proportion of how many people are working, how much money they make, and then how many years they're working for, against the amount of money going out, which is how many people are retired, how much money we need to give them, and for how many years, is no longer on the same scale. The second number is significantly larger. So although pensions are extremely important, we need to revisit a way to make the economic financial model of governments work. And so we need to make a few adjustments. So for today's episode, we're going to shift and move from the scientist lens onto the regulator lens. I personally have done some work with regulators because my work in energy modeling allows me to speak with a lot of stakeholders and policymakers. And so I've seen firsthand how this process works. But again, we're going to move towards the regulator side and try to make a few conclusions about what new policies to help the UK might look like.
Yeah, let's get started with it then, I guess, because I think one of them is more, your idea was kind of along the sides of adapting the actual pension and the way that works. And then I had an idea based on more invigorating the economy from below, I guess you could say. And I'm not a policymaker like you are, Fede, so my idea is maybe a bit more, I don't know if it's within the realms of reality so much, but let's give it a go and see what we come up with. So what was your idea firstly for this?
Yeah, I actually did a very extensive idea with multi-steps, but I thought that the first thing that governments need to address is their balance sheet. And at the moment, pensions are in a negative, in a deficit. We have too much money going out compared to money coming in. I think that a way to possibly resolve this is to, over the next few decades, 20, 30, 40 years, we should phase out the guaranteed pension scheme and limit a minimum amount of pension for the people that don't have enough savings in their bank account. And instead, we should incentivize people to build their own pension through either private pension funds or through their own savings. This way, we cut costs on the one hand, and then to increase the entrance, the money coming in to the government's pocket, we should include a wealth tax for people that have a net worth above £10 million. £10 million is an arbitrary number in this case, which I think sounds reasonable, but this perhaps might need to change based on inflation and based on wealth distribution. And this idea is not completely made up out of thin air. So the wealth tax exists in Norway, exists in Switzerland. There are two of the richest countries in the world. And the reduction in pension is actually an approach that Denmark has taken, where they have moved the retirement age up to 71 years of age. And at the same time, they've decreased the amount of pension guaranteed to everybody. So I think that if the wealthiest countries in the world are already moving in this direction, perhaps the UK should revisit. And although it sounds harsh to some extent, I think that there is some merit to this policy.
It's an interesting one because you're talking about a system that reduces the cost of pensions. And it's one of those things that sounds great on paper, but do you think there are people who would, A, just not save their whole life and be super short-sighted? And I think there'll be more of those kinds of people than you might imagine. And then they get to pension age and they need state help anyway. Or secondly, I don't know if there would be, I know we're talking hypothetically here anyway, so maybe this question is a bit secondary, but I don't think the UK public, at least if we're talking UK-centric here, would agree to like reducing their pensions. It's such an integral thing in terms of like voting. I mean, successive governments have locked in the pension stronger and stronger over the generations. And if they touch that, they just know that they're going to lose a huge voting block of anybody who's in that age bracket, right? I just think it would be politically super toxic to kind of suggest that kind of thing here. But maybe that's not your problem as a policy suggester. Maybe that's a PR problem. No. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit later.
No, I like your question. And I actually have a plan to some extent to address this. So firstly, once you have that money into the government's pocket, you should firstly do a financial education plan. So you should invest into schools. You should invest into online courses that teach financial education to people. And this is significantly cheaper. Teaching a few hours, 10 hours course on financial fundamentals is a lot cheaper than paying pension for 40 years. And I think that this will open the eyes on people on the fact that pensions are not so great. I mean, I've been working for over 7 years now, and there was only a brief window of 2 years where I contributed into my pension. And that's because my company had a double or triple match. So they were putting down twice as much money as I was putting in. And so in that case, made sense. But beside that, I've always paid the bare minimum into my pension because I don't know if that money is going to come back to me when I'm going to be 70, 80 years old. The bar is moving further and further. And so there is so much uncertainty about when I'm going to see this money and how much it's going to be worth. And so I can just have this money in my pocket and invest it just as if it was my pension. I can put it into my ISA, I can put it into a home, I can put it into something else, into government bonds, etc. But in this way, I have the power to control and take it out whenever convenient to me. If I want to, buy a bigger home when I turn 40, I can do that. If I want to put my kids through private school, I can do that. So to some extent, it will teach people to have a sense of investment in themselves more than just passively going through life hoping to get to retirement. So the financial education aspect is fundamental. The second thing is that with that capital that the government has, we can now develop a lot of infrastructure. And I'm thinking about housing and I'm thinking about renewable energy projects. And what you can now do is with the excess money that people now have because they haven't contributed to their pension as much, you can make a system where they can actually buy or contribute to the renewable energy programs and to housing programs. And so in this way, let's say we want to build 1 million houses in Birmingham or Manchester or Glasgow or Edinburgh or Leeds, cities that are already big enough, but perhaps could be expanded just a little bit with a few hundreds of thousands of houses just to help by decreasing the housing prices. Now you can give an opportunity to people to have a stake in these houses, have a stake in these energy programs, and this will get them, it's the same as buying a bond really, but it will get you a little bit of money coming in every month for the rest of your life. And then I have some other plans that we can discuss later, but let's start with this. Do you think that there is some value in what I'm saying, or am I just too optimistic and none of this is actually feasible?
I think it's a good idea. I do think that you can financially educate people as much as you want, but there will be plenty of people who just don't care and would just spend it instead of saving it away. So I think in some way you have to incentivize it, or you have to just force people to do it, basically. What about people who don't have super high paying jobs and maybe they can't work or they don't work much, are they just going to be screwed in later
Well,
life, for example?
I still think that there should be a minimum level of pension for the people that don't have enough savings. So I think that we still maintain pension for those people, but the idea is that we should enable people to become independent at a much younger age, by 50, being able to have enough savings so that you can live until 100. We shouldn't have a lot of citizens just struggling the last 5 years of their employment trying to save everything they can.
That's true.
Also because the money is not there. The money is not there. My scenario is hypothetical and there is low pension in my imaginary scenario. But the truth is that in real life, pensions are a little bit like a Ponzi scheme, right? We are hoping that there will be plenty of people that will be born after us that will pay for us in 50-year time. This sounds as crazy to me as my opinion. I don't know which one is less likely to happen, honestly.
I suppose you could so you want to spice up this policy a bit and add some details to refine it, right? You could do something along the lines of, you could increase, if the salary is lower, you could increase government matching in a sort of reversed way. So the lower your salary, the higher the government chips in. So that would encourage people to do some kind of job and work. Lower salaries don't lose out on the big money makers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that is certainly a good idea that could
I don't
be
know if
included,
Yeah, I hope that would work somehow. Again, I'm not an expert in the policy side, but the other thing I was thinking is you could do something with, you could make it so that if people invest this money, and you could kind of ring fence this money so that they have to invest it somewhere maybe. But if they choose to invest it in the UK stock market, they get some kind of tax relief. Well, you'd have to do tax relief on anyway, or else people would say, where's my money gone? But if you could give them some kind of incentive to invest in the UK stock market, that would, or whatever the country they're from, let's make this worldwide. You could invest in the country, the stocks of the country where they live. They could get some kind of incentivization or benefits from that. And that would boost the economy. Thinking. Yeah, hopefully that would make some kind of impact. I love how you're thinking. Right?
That is my third step. My third step is that with that money that the government has, it's not just going to go in financial education. It's going to go in housing. It's going to go in renewable energy, because I think that those are extremely important. But then you invest in startups. And so you make sure that every startup that is promising, the government gets to invest at an early stage and get a stake in. And you also make it easier for people in the UK to invest in the UK stock market or the European stock market with a small tax rebate, for example, so that there is an incentive to invest locally rather than going to invest in the UK. And what you do is that from a startup perspective, you prevent startups below a certain valuation, and this can be, a market cap of £10 million, to receive investment from private investors that are not based in the UK. So if you have a worry about the wealth tax driving away investors, you prevent investors from other country to invest in any company in the UK whose market cap, so valuation, is below £10 million or £20 million, whatever. And so by doing so, now there is an incentive to remain so that you can invest. And you also get a tax rebate by investing in the housing, the renewable energy sector, or the startups that are in the UK. And so I think that these three steps, so changing the pension and taxation system first, then giving the financial education plus opportunity to have a small ownership in renewable energy and housing so that everybody gets some sort of dividend coming in. And you're actually an owner of the renewable energy and the housing where you live, rather than having a private company that owns all of it. And then all the money goes in dividends to some investor that is probably based in China, because that's usually what happens. At least the citizens own these stocks in something that is a physical asset. And this will remain for decades, potentially all the way to their pension. And then the third step is you protect European and UK startups through this process where they cannot get investments. And one last thing that you could do if you are thinking very long term, you also make it easier in terms of taxes to IPO in the UK or the European stock market. Because once these companies reach, £1 billion, £10 billion, they all go and they IPO in the New York Stock Exchange, which is extremely disappointing because they bring all the wealth away from Europe to New York and California, which is terrible.
Yeah, totally. The only thing, I love this because it's like flipping everything on its head, but still making it financially benefiting everybody. But the one little thing I just thought, what if somebody invests in lots of private stocks and startups, etc., and they just get unlucky and the things that they invest in are not successful, or they go to zero. Or you could imagine an idea where these investments are a lot more risky than just a pension fund, right? That's like the whole benefit of a pension fund is that it's so safe and secure and it grows. I mean, I know you can add risk to it, but with a private one, but I think the one danger would be you could just get some unlucky schmuck who does everything right and ends up with no money at the end because the stuff they've invested in just happens not to work out, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe I'm thinking a bit too niche.
No, you're right. I think we should think about this problem as well. Before I answer that specific question, I'm going to give the counter argument, though, that pension funds, firstly, are doing the same risk investments that you would have to do by yourself. And secondly, they, on top of doing the risk investments, they take a massive cut. I remember looking at the statements from my pension, and every year they were getting 6%, 4%, 3% return return on investments, growth. I mean, my bank, which is Revolut, gives me 4%. So they're doing as bad as 4% is nothing in today's economy because inflation is easily above 7% a year, considering after COVID, we're talking about 7% a year. And so they are pretty much not helping myself out. And although I'm a little bit geeky and I like to invest on the stock market, I can easily get 40+% by investing in the Mag 7, which non-financial advice. I'm not saying that anybody should do that. And, because obviously you waste a lot of time and you need to be relatively familiar with the companies to know when to invest and etc. But my point is that pension funds don't really do you a favor considering the amount of fees that they take. Now, going back to the problem of, do we trust every citizen to make the right investment so that they don't lose all their money? That is a really challenging question. I think perhaps there is space for government-led bonds where, the government just makes a massive bond where there is all the housing investments and all the renewable energy investments, and people just trust the government, and then the government perhaps could do, or this fund, not really the government, more like a fund. The fund could spread all the returns evenly. So there is going to be some housing projects or companies that does extremely well and someone else that does terribly, but you still split all the revenue evenly amongst all investors without discriminating between the companies that succeeded and the ones who didn't. I mean, yeah, there is a lot of flaws from this very generalistic approach that I've described, that there are so many tedious details that we would need to iron out if we wanted to make this work. Yeah.
Yeah. But overall, as a hypothetical idea, I think it's like great. I mean, we could expand on the details later if people like it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You also had a really good suggestion.
Let me see if I can articulate what I was thinking. It's a kind of approaching the problem from the complete opposite direction. Because the way I see it with an aging population, the roots of it are that you don't have enough young people paying into the system and as old people drawing from the system. And those old people worked all their life and they deserve to be taken care of. But I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the fundamental problem is that the birth rate's going down. There are more and more old people who live a lot longer because of these improvements in medical care. And so it's a reason why the government's obsessed with growth. And it's a reason why we've had very high levels of immigration in the last few years, because economically we need to have that, because we need to have younger people working to support the older population. It's just economically the way it works. But high immigration has become a toxic political issue, especially in the UK. And I was thinking that the hypothetical policy that could help with this, and I'm not saying this is fully thought out with all of the details and the morals of it and everything, but just to say it at the beginning, that the idea that came to me was that you want to have people coming here and working when they're young and then leaving before they draw out as a draw on the system, right? But they leave before they draw out the pension and their healthcare costs. So I was thinking that the best way to do that would be to think about how you could design a new kind of visa or a new kind of immigration policy, which would encourage people to come and work, and it would encourage them to also leave at the end of a certain time period. So I was thinking that you could have a visa, which in the UK, you have these very punitive healthcare levies and things that fund their healthcare while they're in the UK. And you also have quite high visa costs. And these things are very expensive. And I don't think they're particularly fair if people are paying into the system as they work anyway. And I think they put people off, really. So I think you should have some kind of quite flexible visa where you're allowed to come. You don't need an employer to sponsor you to come in, and you don't need to pay exorbitant visa or healthcare fees but it allows you to get jobs in the UK. Don't get benefits unless you're working and they're subject to the idea that you have a job. And instead of paying into a pension, you could pay into some kind of dividend fund where at the end of your visa's term, you get paid back the money that you paid in, plus a top up from the government or a matching the amount from the government, which would encourage people to get to the end of the visa and leave the country and gain that bonus at the end. So they're not paying into a pension, but they're paying into some kind of fund that they get access to at the end of their stay, which encourages them to stay on this temporary but quite welcoming visa. So the idea is a visa that gets them into the country and works and doesn't punish them and doesn't charge them crazy fees, but also encourages them leaving. And then if they try and stay and transition onto a permanent visa, they're not blocked from doing so. People get married or they want to stay. That's perfectly fine. But then you lose the bonus. You don't get access to that dividend money and you have to pay all the fees that we pay for visas regularly now, like the healthcare surcharge and the visa application fees. So nobody's blocked from doing that, but it would incentivize people to come in, work. Maybe that's from the ages of 20 to 45 or something. So you're in your healthy, young, productive years. You work, you contribute to the economy, you get a big, nice bonus that lets you go home and start a business in your home country, or that's your savings pot for your own retirement wherever you're from, for example. So everybody wins. Our economy grows. People get like a load of money. They get a higher salary, presumably. They send it home and then they get money at the end to start a business or fund their own retirement wherever they go. But we don't have this like ever increasing amount of old people that constantly draw more and more and more from the system and ultimately leads to this crazy cycle of like infinite growth that's just not really sustainable long term. Mm-hmm. That was my idea. What do you think?
Well, firstly, I think it works because if people can choose between retiring in the UK or Spain, they would probably pick Spain. So it works from that standpoint for sure. But my more serious question would be, the government is making some money from the fees that people pay for the visa, I'm assuming. So what is that money used for? Is it used just to process the application, and in that case, terrible use of the money? Or is the government actually investing it in something more valuable? And if that's the case, that they're investing it, how can we measure that by cutting, let's say the people pay £3,000 to get into the UK for 1 year. If somebody came in without paying that £3,000, will we have enough people coming in and getting a job and paying taxes to an extent that surpasses the income that we make from visas? And I think the answer is yes, but I would like to understand, how do we measure it, and does it make sense?
Well, yeah, it makes complete sense. I'm not exactly sure the answer to that. I'm not like a policy expert in this area. It's just kind of my imagination with the topic and what I know about people having to pay big fees. I think the idea here was that you'd have a lot more people coming to the UK, but a lot less people staying for a long time. That was what I kind of wanted to try and encourage with an imagining a hypothetical, theoretical policy. Because the fun thing about policy is that you have to imagine a way that you can encourage a certain type of behavior without forcing anybody to do anything, and especially not against their own natural wishes. So if you can just gently encourage something that works for you and hopefully for everybody, that's the fun thing about imagining these things, right? So I thought about this because I wanted to have a lot more people coming in at a young age and a lot more people leaving before they get older or start families, staying permanently. And that might sound a bit bad. I'm not saying I'm like anti-immigration whatsoever. I'm not at all. I'm just trying to think about this from a policy idea factory for aging population and what that might look like for a creative idea. I don't know about you, but I think the UK government in particular, and probably a lot of these European governments, are very uncreative when it comes to policy. Like, you can be really creative with this stuff and push it this way and that way.
Yeah, I actually agree with you.
I don't know if that's your experience with like energy policy. Yeah.
I think in the energy sector, the progress that has been made is quite significant. But obviously, when we talk about finances, visa, pensions, immigration, it's a lot more challenging in the sense that everybody talks about it and is not based just on technical knowledge, which is the case with energy. With energy, there is less margin of error because it's so much related to numbers, whether we're talking about optimizing generation or investing. While whether we talk about visas or immigration, there is so much behavior that is so unpredictable. And people can argue in favor or against of the same thing just by saying like, oh, this thing will work because, or this thing will not work because. So behavior is so difficult to predict. But I think that I agree to your point in the sense that there is a lot of people that from Europe want to work in the UK. As an Italian citizen, in Italy, we regard the UK as a high income, high wages country. And this is why everybody from Italy would love to work in the UK. And after Brexit, has been extremely challenging to come in for new Italians. All the people that I know that are from Italy have been here more than 10 years because after Brexit, it was way more difficult to get in. And I know many Americans or many other people from all over the world that although they managed to get a visa, they know that if they don't get the next visa, they will have to leave the country. And I think that this changes how, their perception of how to buy a house, how to invest in the country, how to invest in their pension. If you don't have a plan, then you're not going to commit your investment and your expertise to your career in the UK because you don't know what's going to happen afterwards. And I'm going to give you the word here, but I just wanted to mention that I came up with a potential answer to the question that I gave you, which was if we did cut on visa costs, would more people come and then boost the economy more than the visa fees would have had? And I thought that this sounds a little bit like the Laffer curve, which the Laffer curve says that the more you increase the taxes, the less taxes you get because people will try to avoid them, right? And this is the opposite.
Yeah.
We are cutting taxes. And so many people will want to join the UK that then you actually end up better off. I don't know, maybe reverse Laffer curve.
Yeah, exactly. That was kind of my thinking is that the UK, at least in my perception of it, has been quite stagnant in the last few years. We used to be on par with the US for salaries and quality of life and stuff. And now the US has a lot of problems, but the UK, you can't deny that the salaries are low, the job market's not great. Everything seems to be sort of degraded over the last few years. This kind of idea would, in my thinking, it would boost the economy and it would be great for everybody. You'd have growth, you'd have higher economy, you'd have a bigger economy, so everything would be, your salaries would go up. That would increase the desire for more people to come, more people to get those high salaries, and you'd get a positive cycle instead of a negative one that we currently seem to have found ourselves in. I can see this idea, again, the same as yours, though, to criticize myself, being a little bit politically difficult. I mean, there's already a perception that it's difficult for people to get jobs in the UK. And if you gave people like a free pass visa to come and work wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted, I'm sure that wouldn't go down great with a lot of folks. So I think there are some other considerations from that angle. On a purely hypothetical, not thinking about that kind of way, I do think it would be a great thing because then the economy, you make the salaries higher and you bring more people in, as we said. So yeah, I think probably the reason they don't do it is because of public perception. And I don't know, what do you reckon? Do you think there are other reasons why this wouldn't work or why this isn't the way that they do it currently?
The way you described it, I think was, I think you hit the nail on the head with the fact that at the moment, the perception is that there isn't many jobs. And so letting more people in to some extent will just oversupply employees when there isn't that many openings. I think that the problem might be either related to perhaps a lack of spirit of entrepreneurship to some extent. I feel like at the moment, I have the feeling that there isn't a lot of European or British champions. So companies that have a plan to become $1 billion company. I feel like I hear of new startups in the US IPOing all the time. And obviously not the big IPOs. I'm talking about even the small companies. There is new IPOs every month. In the UK, I don't have this feeling. And so perhaps the economy is a little bit more stagnant. And then the consequence is that the companies don't want to go out and get a loan from the bank to hire new people. But just like everything in economics, I think there is either a vicious cycle or a virtuous cycle. So, the bank is not loaning out the money. The companies are not putting out new jobs. And it's a vicious cycle. So until we hit the bottom of this cycle, we're not going to go back up. But hopefully, just like any other cycle in economics, everything will be different in 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, that's what I think. I think things have a way of balancing. But I think creative policy is one thing that we're lacking a lot at the moment in this country. I really do. I think maybe some would argue that the UK already has quite a lot of immigration in a way that sort of sounds a bit like what I'm saying anyway. So I don't know if other people would counter me by saying that we already do a lot of these things. But I just think that if we adjust a few ways that the visas work, but also encourage people to come on a temporary but productive and happy basis. That was kind of what I'm trying to say for the people who might criticize me from that angle. And I do think if people can get their heads around that side of things, that this could be a way that we get into that virtuous cycle instead of the vicious cycle, as you say. I don't know. Maybe some people would have better, more nuanced ideas than me on this. I don't know, but it seems to me the way to directly attack the problem.
Both our policies, what we suggested, I really liked both of them because they combine aspects that are both economic growth related, but also tax and government spending related. So we are advocating for both a government involvement, but at the same time economic growth, which we can do to some extent because neither you or I are affiliated with any political party. But I feel like there is a stigma that if you are on the side of labor, you can talk about economic growth. And if you are more on the right-wing side, then you can't advocate in favor of taxes or government intervention. And I think that we should completely review the spectrum of political ideas and do what's best for the country, which in my opinion, as both you and I suggested, let's do a mixed approach. Let's not just scrape out ideas just because they don't align with what our name or what our party says.
Yeah. I think, well, as you say, I think Labour has been talking about growth. The problem is that they talk about growth and they don't really explain why we need it or what it is. And it just sounds so lame. Like people are like, well, all right, we got 0.2% growth. Great. Whoa. And they don't really connect it to the reasons why that's important and why the society is set up that that's important. And well, that's not a good thing either. Well, these are two cool ideas. I'd love to hear other people's and what other people think of these. Why don't we end on our bold prediction for the week? Have you got a bold prediction about how this might go in the future? Do you think governments might start to implement some of these more creative ideas, or do you think we're just going to end up in a negative cycle to the doom?
I have a bold prediction, but it's not government related. My prediction is more consumer related. I think that people will fear the retirement age moving so far beyond the 70s and they will therefore develop a plan to retire or perhaps do a sabbatical when they turn 40. And so they will take 10 years off as an early pension, 40 to 50, and then they'll go back to work after. New lifestyle plan. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess if I was to make a bold prediction, I think probably we won't get much creative input from the government, but people might start being a bit more financially educated over time. I mean, we're seeing a big boom in retail investors into stocks. So maybe this kind of thing will happen without government involvement and people will start to do this kind of thing themselves. As people get more and more access to the tools and information with things, just the internet research and AI, they can learn how to do this stuff. So hopefully the natural forces will take their course and people will kind of naturally adapt. Even if governments are constantly eroding pensions or pushing the age back, then people will find a way to adapt to it. I hope. Maybe that's wishful.
Individual investors need to take some power here.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks very much for listening, everybody. And we'll see you next time on Two Humans.
Thank you. Bye-bye.